Disappointment. Now, of course, I have been disappointed. Like like many of us, I've had some disappointments in my life, and they are, well, disappointing. And a couple of the big ones that I've experienced threw me into a loop, life loop, that was not easy to get out of. So I want to talk here a little bit, a bit about the little letdowns of life, or some of them are pretty big. But before I do that, let's look at one big disappointment that happened to me, so that we're all on the same page as to what can happen. In May of 2008, I was, without warning, laid off, let go, from a job that I had as a senior consultant. It was not exactly personal. Many others were laid off too, but I personally was let go, and so it was quite personal enough. And suddenly I had no way of making a living, and I was 66 years old. Anyway, there I was, suddenly financially exposed and old enough to be someone's grandfather. In fact, I was someone's grandfather. So I know it's time for me to retire, and that would have been fine with me if I'd had enough money to retire on. Certainly I had done plenty of work in my life, but as it turned out, I couldn't afford to retire, thanks to another huge financial disappointment, but I will spare you that story for now. Someday I will tell it, though. Anyway, when this happened in 2008, I flashed on something that my first Dharma teacher had told me many, many times, but I never understood too well. He would say, Michael, it's not the $64,000 question, which used to be a popular quiz show back then, but it's the $63,000 question that's important. And when my teacher was 63 years of age, he was caught in a huge boiler explosion at the University of Michigan, and he spent many, many weeks in the hospital. When he finally got out of the hospital, he had used up all of his life savings, and he had to start all over again at that age. So it was a climactic or turning point in his life. We all have them, and they are called, as I mentioned, climactic years in life. And the start of our third Saturn return is just such a thing, in the mid-60s. So perhaps I'm of the same lineage, because there I stood at age 66 without any means of supporting my family. What money I had managed to save was locked up and would not be available for many years. So there I was, kind of staring into the abyss, and it came as a surprise. Now, my response was not totally reasonable, but my response was to go off the reservation. I began to spend a lot of time alone, and oddly enough, not time feeling sorry for myself, but time just out in nature, but with my eyes wide open. I was in a kind of shock as I look back on it. For example, from late May of that year until the frost took over in the fall, and I was forced to come inside, I spent in the fields and the meadows watching the sunrise each morning, just taking it all in. And I did this every day unless it rained or something else I had to do. And I was glued to being outside. I was glued to nature like there was no tomorrow. All this time I was taking photographs. In the early dawn light, I could be found often soaking wet, crawling around in the grass with my camera taking photos of small critters and plants and flowers, things like that. It was the shock of the disappointment that cast me over the edge of society and literally out into the wilderness of my own mind. All at once I was like a free radical, lost for a time from all comfort, just out there on my own, feeling really alone. I'm sure my family did not know what to do with me. I could see by their looks, and the looks of neighbors and town people who would drive by where I was busy photographing nature along the road or something. They must have wondered, what's he doing? as if I knew. I had spent those pre-dawn days the entire summer peering through perfect camera lenses at perfect miniature worlds, like I have many books on photography. Meanwhile, my own world was in chaos, falling down around me. But through that rabbit hole of the camera lens, there were still pristine worlds that were okay, these tiny macro worlds. And I was immersing myself deeply in them. I didn't want to see anything else at the moment. I was kind of outside of time as I know it. Anyway, the story goes on, and I wrote a whole book about it called Experiences with Mahamudra, because it took a shock like losing my job to jolt me out of my comfortable life groove and into some kind of awareness that was stark enough for me to drop some of my attachments and actually wake up a bit, and I did. Anyway, that story came to a happy ending as gradually I stabilized after having been hurled through space and time for a spell, just flung. And I won't relate it here, but the free ebook that I mentioned can be found at dharmagrooves.com, DHARMAGROOVES.com. So what I would like to do here, and perhaps in a blog or two to come, is discuss this whole disappointment thing, how it affects us and what we can do with it. It happens to everyone sooner or later, including you.